They didn't come with weapons. That was the first mistake. When the alien delegation entered human space, there were no warships leading the way, no planetary shields raised, no dramatic displays of force. Instead, their vessels moved slowly, confidently, like owners inspecting property that already belonged to them. To the Galactic Council, Earth was not a threat. It was an asset that simply hadn't been organized yet. For centuries, the Council had expanded the same way, quietly. They absorbed systems without firing a single shot. They didn't conquer worlds, they administered them. They arrived, delivered terms, installed oversight, and left behind advisors who made sure obedience followed. Most species complied, because resistance was inconvenient. The humans didn't understand that yet, or so the Council believed. The first transmission reached Earth on a calm orbital morning. No jamming, no encryption, just a clean, polite signal routed through every major communication array on the planet. This is a formal notice of compliance review. That was it. No threat, no warning, just an assumption. Within minutes, the signal had been translated into every human language. Governments paused, militaries listened, analysts frowned, and somewhere deep inside human command structures, a quiet alarm went off, not loud enough to panic anyone, but sharp enough to be remembered. Because humans recognized that tone. It was the same tone tax collectors used, the same tone corporations used before acquisitions, the same tone empires had always used right before they took something that wasn't theirs. The envoy arrived 3 days later. Their flagship docked above Earth's primary diplomatic station, a structure humans had built as a gesture of goodwill, not necessity. The station rotated slowly, white and blue against the dark, designed to look open, inviting. The alien ship dwarfed it, not aggressively, just casually, as if size itself were a reminder. Ambassador Carvel stepped onto the station with a retinue of aides and observers, tall, pale, multi-limbed. His species wore authority the way humans wore uniforms, naturally, without question. His eyes scanned the human delegation with mild interest. No hostility, no respect, just expectation. And said, "Welcome, we'll hear your proposal." Not terms, not demands, a proposal. Carvel paused for exactly half a second. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but every council observer recorded it. Inside the chamber, holographic displays activated. Star maps, trade routes, resource flows, human systems highlighted in calm blue. "This will be brief," he said. "Earth has reached a developmental threshold. As per council protocols, your species now falls under administrative oversight." One of the aides smiled, not kindly. "You will retain internal autonomy," Carvel continued, "while external decision-making, trade, defense alignment, expansion, will be guided by council authority." Lena listened without interruption. No objections, no outrage, no speeches. The alien observers mistook that silence for submission. "You will contribute resources," Carvel added, "personnel, manufacturing output, strategic positioning." He folded his hands. "In return, you will receive protection." That word hung in the air. Protection? From what? Lena finally spoke. "From whom?" Carvel tilted his head, confused by the question. "From instability," he replied. "From chaos, from your own inexperience." A murmur passed through the human delegation, not anger, but something closer to calculation. Carvel continued, confident again. "Compliance is expected within one standard cycle." He leaned back slightly. "Resistance is inconvenient." That was the third mistake, because humans don't hear inconvenient as a warning, they hear it as a challenge. The meeting ended politely, too politely. No raised voices, no ultimatums exchanged. The alien delegation departed, satisfied. Their reports noted minimal emotional reaction, no aggressive posture, and no immediate refusal. They categorized humanity as compliant-prone. Back on Earth, something else was happening. Not panic, not mobilization, not speeches. Meetings. Quiet ones. In underground facilities and secure orbital rooms, humans started asking questions the Council never thought to anticipate. Not how do we fight them, but how do they enforce obedience? What happens when a species says no? What does oversight actually mean in practice? Humans studied Council history. They noticed patterns. Every species that accepted oversight stagnated within 2 generations. Innovation slowed, military doctrines calcified, culture softened. Not because the Council was cruel, but because obedience was efficient, and efficiency kills adaptability. Humans understood that too well. They didn't reject the Council publicly, not yet. Instead, Earth sent a response. Short, respectful, measured. Earth requires clarification on enforcement mechanisms before formal consideration. Carvel read it and smiled. That was expected. Clarification always came before acceptance. He sent back documentation. That was the fourth mistake.
Because humans read everything. They read the clauses about corrective measures. They read the footnotes about limited intervention. They read the historical examples buried deep in appendices. And they realized something critical. The Council didn't rule through war. They ruled through dependence. They didn't destroy defined worlds. They isolated them, redirected trade, withdrew protection, let pressure do the work. It was elegant, bloodless, and devastating. Most species broke within years. Humans didn't panic. They smiled, because pressure was something they had always trained for. And for the first time since the Council began its expansion, a species looked at oversight and thought, what happens if we don't obey? Not out of fear, but curiosity.
The Galactic Council did not like delays. They tolerated hesitation. They tolerated negotiation. But uncertainty made them uncomfortable, because uncertainty meant a system wasn't behaving the way it was supposed to. Ambassador Carvel reviewed Earth's request for clarification again as his flagship drifted beyond lunar orbit. The language was careful, polite, framed as due diligence. It irritated him more than open refusal would have. Most species asked questions because they were afraid. Humans asked questions because they were thinking. Still, the Council had dealt with this before. When a civilization hesitated, the solution was simple. Apply pressure, just enough to remind them of scale. 3 weeks later, Earth felt it. Not through weapons, through silence. Council trade lanes quietly rerouted. Ships that once passed through human space no longer did. Automated markets flagged Earth exports as pending review. Logistics slowed. Supply chains stretched. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be called hostile, just enough friction to be noticed. On paper, it looked like a technical issue. In reality, it was a demonstration. This is what happens when you don't answer. Human analysts noticed immediately. But instead of panic, something strange happened. Domestic production increased. Local manufacturing replaced imports. Experimental projects that had been under review for years suddenly received funding. Pressure didn't weaken Earth. It focused it. Carvel received reports that confused him. No civil unrest detected. No leadership fractures. Economic stabilization within projected margins. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. He authorized Phase 2. Council patrol fleets began routine exercises near human borders. Massive, elegant ships drifting just close enough to be seen. Not threatening, merely present. The message was simple. We are watching. Human military sensors tracked every movement. And then nothing happened. No mobilization, no escalation, no warnings issued. Human defense fleets remained in dock. Orbital weapons stayed cold. Public communications barely acknowledged the presence. That unsettled the Council more than resistance ever had, because fear was loud. Calm was not. A second meeting was scheduled. This time, the Council sent the war representatives, observers, advisors, legal authorities. They filled the diplomatic chamber with quiet confidence, their bodies arranged in patterns that subtly reinforced hierarchy. Humans noticed the formations immediately. They always did. Carvel spoke again, his tone unchanged. Earth's request for clarification has been fulfilled, he said. We now require your compliance decision. Director Ortiz folded her hands. We're still reviewing. A ripple of irritation passed through the alien delegation. You are stalling, one advisor said flatly. Ortiz didn't deny it. We're being careful. Carvel leaned forward. You misunderstand your position, he said. This is not a negotiation. Ortiz met his gaze. Everything is a negotiation, she replied. The room went still. One of the observers shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Carvel exhaled slowly. Earth is not unique, he said. Thousands of worlds have undergone this process. All of them benefited. Ortiz nodded. We've reviewed those cases. Carvel's confidence returned. Then you understand the inevitability. Ortiz tilted her head slightly. We understand the pattern. That wasn't what he wanted to hear. She continued. Every species that accepted oversight reduced independent research within 2 generations. Military innovation declined. Cultural divergence flattened.
Carvel waved a limb dismissively. Stability requires sacrifice. Ortiz smiled faintly. So does freedom. That was the moment the council delegation finally realized something was wrong, not because of what she said, but because she wasn't emotional. There was no pride, no outrage, no desperation, just observation. After the meeting, Carvel sent a private report. Humans exhibit abnormal resistance markers, he dictated. Recommend accelerated compliance timeline. The council agreed. Phase 3 began. Council-aligned species received guidance to pause cooperation with Earth. Joint research initiatives were suspended. Cultural exchanges canceled. Earth was being isolated, slowly, quietly, just like so many others before. But humans noticed something the Council did not. Isolation created necessity. Necessity created innovation. And innovation, when unconstrained, accelerated faster than anyone expected. In secure facilities, engineers stopped asking for Council compatibility approvals. Military planners stopped designing for joint operations. Scientists stopped worrying about interspecies ethics committees. For the first time, humanity was building without external expectations. And something else began to happen. Human diplomats quietly contacted fringe species, not the powerful ones, not the compliant ones, the overlooked, the sidelined, the ones who had accepted oversight because they had no other choice. The conversations were casual, curious. What was it like before? What did you lose? What would you do differently? The answers were always the same. We survived, they said, but we stopped becoming. When reports of these contacts reached the Council, they were dismissed. Humans are venting, one advisor said. They'll accept soon. Carvel wasn't so sure anymore, because the pressure wasn't breaking Earth. It was sharpening it. And beneath the calm exterior, something was forming. Not a rebellion, not a war plan. Something worse. A decision.
The Council's deadline arrived without ceremony. No alarms, no dramatic announcement. Just a timestamp embedded in a diplomatic packet that translated cleanly into every known language. Earth had 72 standard hours to confirm compliance. If they didn't, the Council would proceed accordingly. Carvel expected resistance to break by the second day. It always did. By the third day, most species began offering concessions, partial compliance, temporary oversight, symbolic gestures to save face. Humans did none of that. Instead, exactly 1 hour before the deadline expired, Earth transmitted a response. It was brief. No qualifiers, no emotional language, no counteroffers. Just one sentence. Earth declines Council oversight. The transmission ended there. For 3 full seconds, the chamber remained silent. Then someone laughed. A short clicking sound from one of the senior delegates, an instinctive response to what they perceived as a misunderstanding. Carvel didn't laugh. He reread the message, twice. Then a third time, slower. Declines, he repeated aloud. A legal advisor flicked through precedent archives. No recognized civilization has ever declined at this stage, she said, not formally. Another delegate waved a limb dismissively. Posturing, he said, they'll reverse within the cycle. Carvel wasn't convinced. Humans had declined cleanly. No threats, no justification, no appeal to emotion, just refusal. That wasn't defiance. That was finality. Protocol required escalation. Carvel authorized Enforcement Demonstration Alpha. Within hours, a Council task group crossed into Earth's outer system, publicly logged, perfectly legal under interstellar treaty clauses humans hadn't signed yet. Massive ships emerged from fold space like monuments, elegant, ancient, untouchable. Their presence was broadcast across human networks whether Earth wanted it or not. This is a reminder, Carvel announced on open diplomatic channels, of the protection Earth rejects. He expected panic. What he got instead was commentary. Human media framed the arrival as unexpected traffic. Civilian channels discussed ship design. Independent analysts speculated about power output. No emergency broadcasts, no evacuation orders, no visible fear. Human military still did not deploy. Council observers noted the anomaly with mild concern.
Perhaps they don't understand the scale, someone suggested. Carvel authorized closer proximity. The task group advanced. That's when Earth responded again. This time, the message wasn't diplomatic. It wasn't even addressed to the Council. It was a system-wide transmission, broadcast openly on human frequencies, and critically left unencrypted. Anyone could hear it. The voice was calm, neutral, male. "This is Earth Unified Command," it said. "We acknowledge the presence of foreign fleets in our outer system." Pause. "We are not threatened." Another pause. "You are currently within observation range. No further approach is advised." That was it. No countdown, no ultimatum, just a statement. Council officers exchanged looks. "Observation range?" Carvel leaned forward. "What does that mean?" he demanded. Sensors answered before words could. Council ships began receiving pings. Not aggressive scans, not targeting locks. Something else. Passive returns. Detailed, layered, impossible. Human sensors were mapping Council vessels at a resolution the Council believed was classified beyond most civilizations. Internal layouts, energy flow pathways, shield harmonics. It was invasive. "How are they seeing this?" an engineer demanded. "They shouldn't have the technology." Carvel felt a cold realization settle in his core. Humans hadn't built bigger weapons. They'd built better eyes. "This is a warning," Carvel transmitted. "Cease immediately." Earth's reply came almost instantly. "We are complying with your presence," the same voice said. "We are not engaging." Then softly, "But we are learning." The task group halted its advance. Council doctrine did not include scenarios where a pre-compliant species demonstrated technical parity without provocation. Worse, this wasn't parity. This was understanding. Behind the scenes, Council analysts worked frantically. Human power signatures didn't match known models. Their energy distribution was inefficient by Council standards, but flexible, adaptive, messy, dangerous. "They don't optimize for elegance," one analyst said slowly. "They optimize for survival." The Council convened an emergency session. Some argued for immediate sanctions. Others suggested direct enforcement. Carvel spoke last. "Humans are not refusing out of pride," he said. "They are refusing because they believe they can afford to." Silence followed. No species was supposed to believe that. Meanwhile, on Earth, no celebrations were held. No speeches made. In secure rooms, human planners reviewed the data their sensors had collected and smiled. Not because they wanted a fight, but because now they understood something critical. The Council wasn't invincible. It was just unused to being questioned. And humans had only just started asking.
The Council did not retaliate immediately. That restraint confused many of its members. Across centuries, obedience had been enforced through speed, swift punishment, overwhelming presence, no time for doubt to grow. Delay was weakness. But humans were new, and unpredictability, Carvel argued, required patience. Instead of force, the Council chose something subtler: a test. 3 days after the task group halted its advance, a new communiqué was issued, not to Earth's unified command, but to a single, carefully selected target: Luna. Specifically, the orbital industrial ring known as Artemis Array. It was a civilian installation, publicly registered, commercial, critical. The Council's message was polite, almost generous. "Under provisional compliance measures," the communiqué read, "the Artemis Array will suspend operations pending Council safety review. This is a temporary precaution." Temporary. Precaution. Words that had disarmed 100 worlds before. Council ships repositioned, not toward Earth, but around the array. No weapons were powered, no shields raised, just presence. Carvel watched the feeds closely. This was the moment most species folded. Civilians panicked, governments fractured, command structures scrambled to protect economic lifelines. But on Earth, something different happened. The Artemis Array did not shut down. It didn't accelerate production. It didn't broadcast outrage. It simply continued. Same output, same traffic, same routines. as if the Council fleets weren't there at all. Perhaps they didn't receive the message, a junior delegate suggested. They received it, Carvel said quietly. Because Earth replied. This time, not with a voice, but with data. A public transmission, again unencrypted. A simple chart. Energy output curves, population dependency ratios, supply chain redundancy, and one highlighted line. Artemis Array is not a strategic vulnerability. Below it, a single sentence. Interference will not alter Earth's compliance posture. That sentence unsettled the chamber. Not because it was threatening, but because it was factual. They're saying we picked the wrong target, someone muttered. Carvel's crest tightened. The Council had never been wrong about leverage before. Still, procedure demanded escalation. Not destruction, just consequence. A Council cruiser drifted closer to the array, close enough that human civilians could see it with the naked eye, an immense alien shape blotting out stars. Then the cruiser engaged its null field generator. Power drained from the array. Lights dimmed, docking traffic stalled, artificial gravity flickered. On Earth, news feeds lit up, not with panic, with questions. Engineers explained redundancies. Officials confirmed safety margins. Independent analysts pointed out something unusual. The power drain wasn't absolute. The array was compensating. How? A Council engineer demanded. They're rerouting from planetary sources, another replied. But that's inefficient. Yes, the first said slowly. But it works. The null field strained. Council technology was designed to suppress centralized systems. Human infrastructure wasn't centralized. It was layered, redundant, overbuilt. The array stabilized. Not perfectly, but enough. Then Earth responded. Not diplomatically, operationally. Human cargo vessels, unarmed, civilian, altered course. They began docking with the array manually. No automated systems, no reliance on external power, just pilots, thrusters, human judgment. Council observers watched in disbelief as traffic resumed under partial blackout conditions. Slow, messy, effective. This is reckless, a delegate said. No, Carvel corrected. This is practiced. The Council cruiser increased output. The null field surged. And then, it failed. Not catastrophically. It simply disengaged. Alarms rippled through the cruiser. Engineers scrambled. The generator hadn't been attacked. It had been overloaded. Human systems hadn't resisted the null field. They'd fed into it, redirected excess energy, pushed instability back into the generator's harmonics. Not a weapon, a stress response. The cruiser pulled back instinctively. The Artemis Array's lights returned to full brightness. A message followed, short, clear. This concludes your test, Earth Unified Command said. You now understand our position. Silence filled the Council chamber. No species had ever passed a compliance test by breaking the test itself without firing a shot. This was not defiance, one legal advisor whispered. This was demonstration. Carvel felt something unfamiliar creep into his calculations. Not fear, recognition. Humans weren't trying to win. They were showing the Council something uncomfortable, that obedience wasn't guaranteed, and leverage wasn't absolute. Behind closed doors, Council analysts revised threat assessments. Humanity's classification shifted quietly, from developing civilization to strategic uncertainty. And for the first time in Council history, a note was appended. Avoid coercive escalation without full understanding. On Earth, the Artemis Array returned to normal operations. No speeches, no celebrations, just a brief internal memo circulated through command channels. Council pressure ineffective, expect escalation. Humans weren't relieved, they were preparing. Because they knew something now the Council hadn't fully grasped yet. The test of obedience hadn't been for Earth. It had been for the Council. And the Council had failed it.
The Council convened an emergency session. What had happened at Artemis Array wasn't classified as a defeat. Officially, it was logged as a localized operational anomaly. Unofficially, it shook centuries of doctrine. For the first time, a species had absorbed pressure without fracturing, and worse, had turned a compliance test into a lesson. That could not stand. Council authority was not built on destruction alone. It was built on reputation. And reputation demanded correction. Earth must be reminded, High Arbiter Carvel declared, his voice steady, that restraint is a courtesy, not a right. The chamber murmured in agreement. The question was not if the council would respond, it was where. The decision was swift. They would not strike Earth proper. They would not touch Luna again. Too visible, too symbolic. Instead, they chose something quieter, a peripheral colony, a place that mattered just enough. Haven 12, a human agricultural outpost on the edge of Sol's expanded economic sphere. Population 1.8 million, primary export bioengineered grain strains, strategic value minimal, moral value maximum. The council framed it as enforcement, a containment sterilization to prevent unauthorized technological proliferation. In simpler terms, they were going to burn a farm world. The strike force arrived without warning, no ultimatum, no negotiation, just a sudden distortion in local space, and then light. The sky over Haven 12 split open as council plasma lances descended. Fields turned to glass in seconds. Cities went dark as orbital relays were cut. Emergency shelters sealed, but many were old, underfunded, built for storms, not annihilation. Human command detected the attack within 90 seconds. By the time response fleet spun up, it was already too late. The council didn't linger. They never did. The strike lasted exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes of calculated destruction. Then the ships vanished. What they left behind wasn't extinction. It was survival. Barely. 1/3 of the population dead, another third injured or displaced, hospitals overwhelmed, atmosphere scorched thin in patches. The council transmitted its justification minutes later. This action concludes enforcement procedures. Further resistance will result in proportional response. On Earth, there was no immediate reply, no broadcast, no threat. Just silence. That silence was misread. In the council chamber, some delegates relaxed. The lesson was delivered, one said. They will understand boundaries now. But on Earth, something else was happening. The attack didn't trigger panic. It triggered focus. Every human channel, civilian, military, industrial, shifted priority. 8 ships launched without orders. Hospitals on Mars cleared bats. Civilian transports rerouted. No speeches, no rage-filled transmissions, just movement. And in the background, something deeper changed. For decades, human doctrine had been defensive. Containment, deterrence, de-escalation. Haven 12 broke that model. Because it wasn't strategic. It was personal. Every human colony had been built with the same assumption, that distance meant safety. Haven 12 proved that assumption false. 3 days after the attack, Earth responded, not with fleets, with words. A single transmission addressed to the council. This message is not a threat, the human representative said, voice calm, almost tired. The feed switched. Images from Haven 12 filled the chamber. Burned farmland, collapsed shelters, children wrapped in emergency thermal foil. Not sensationalized, just documented. This targeted civilians, the voice continued, not accidentally, not as collateral, as policy. Silence. Then, this changes our posture. Carvel leaned forward. Clarify, he demanded. The human looked directly into the camera. You asked for obedience, they said. You demonstrated consequences. A pause. We accept that lesson. The feed cut. No declaration of war, no ultimatum. But something in the chamber shifted. Because humans hadn't said what they would do. They had said what they had learned. And that was worse. Behind closed doors, council analysts began updating projections. Human response windows shortened. Escalation thresholds recalculated. For the first time, a red flag appeared in the margins of the model. Retaliation likely, asymmetric, delayed. On Earth, rescue operations at Haven 12 continued. Bodies were counted, survivors stabilized, names recorded. And in quiet rooms far from cameras, planners did something new. They stopped asking how to deter the council. They began asking how to end the problem.
Because Haven 12 wasn't just an attack. It was proof. Proof that obedience wouldn't save them. And if survival required consequences, then consequences would be delivered. Not loudly, not quickly, but permanently.
The galaxy expected retaliation. After Haven 12, most species assumed the pattern was clear. A strike would follow, then a war, then devastation on a scale no one could control. That was how power had always answered power. Humans didn't follow that script. They didn't launch fleets, they didn't broadcast demands, they didn't even move visibly. Instead, they began to disappear. At first, it wasn't noticed. A human trade delegation failed to arrive at a routine council economic summit. A joint research team withdrew from a multi-species station without explanation. Licensing renewals quietly lapsed. None of it triggered alarms. Humanity had always been selective about participation. Then the patterns emerged. Cargo routes that depended on human logistics began running late. Repair schedules for shared infrastructure slipped by weeks. Critical components, manufactured only in human space, were suddenly unavailable due to internal reprioritization. The Council issued formal inquiries. Earth replied politely, each time, "With regret, we are unable to fulfill this request at present." No hostility, no accusations, just absence. The first systems to feel it were the outer trade hubs, stations built on the assumption that human freight would always arrive. They didn't collapse, they stalled. Then the data nets started behaving strangely. Long-range relays experienced intermittent failures. Navigation updates lagged. Jump coordinates, once precise, began showing growing margins of error. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that justified retaliation, but enough to make captains nervous. Council engineers traced the issue quickly. The core routing architecture for modern hyperspace navigation had been human-designed, not owned by them, shared, maintained collaboratively. Human teams had simply stopped showing up. No sabotage, no virus, just a vacuum. "Why are they doing this?" a junior delegate asked during a closed session. Carvel didn't answer immediately. He was staring at a projection, a map of trade flows. Human nodes weren't flashing red. They weren't marked hostile. They were just dark. "That's the danger," he said finally. "They aren't attacking us. They're removing themselves." The Council attempted leverage. They threatened sanctions. Earth acknowledged receipt, then calmly reminded the Council that nearly 40% of interstellar industrial fabrication relied on human supply chains, either directly or through derivative licensing. Sanctions would be mutual. The threat evaporated. Next came coercion. Council patrols began inspecting human vessels more aggressively, delaying shipments, issuing fines, flexing authority. The human response was immediate. Every civilian human ship pulled back into human-controlled space, not in protest, in procedure. Commercial insurance clauses were invoked, risk thresholds recalculated. Human traders stopped crossing Council borders altogether. Within days, freight insurance premiums across half the galaxy spiked. Markets reacted, then panicked, because the Council didn't just govern. It regulated movement, and movement required trust. That trust had been quietly underwritten by human reliability for decades. When that vanished, the system didn't break. It slowed. And in interstellar civilization, delay is death. Medical shipments missed windows, food convoys arrived spoiled, energy grids lost synchronization. Species began filing complaints, not against humans, against the Council. "You provoked them," a delegate accused. Carvel's mandibles twitched. "We enforced order." "You burned a colony," another replied. Silence fell. The Council issued a formal demand. Human participation in shared systems would be mandatory under decree authority. Earth responded with a single sentence. "Human assets will not be compelled into environments deemed hostile to civilian life." No insult, no threat, just a statement of fact. Behind that fact was something far more dangerous. Human infrastructure had been built redundantly, independently. Where others centralized, humans decentralized. Where others optimized for efficiency, humans optimized for failure. They didn't need the Council's lanes. The Council needed theirs. Weeks passed, then months, and the galaxy changed. Smaller species began reaching out to Earth directly, not for alliance, for access.
repair contracts, navigation data, emergency logistics. Earth answered selectively, quietly, without announcements. The Council watched as influence leaked away, not stolen, but offered elsewhere. And still, no fleets moved, no weapons fired. Just a steady reduction of relevance. In a private briefing, an analyst finally said what no one else would. "This is containment," she said, "but not of territory." Carvel looked up. Then of what? Of us. The realization hit slowly. Humans weren't trying to overthrow the Council. They were making it unnecessary. A governing body without logistics, without trade authority, without enforcement reach. A symbol. One that could be ignored. And worst of all, one that could not justify war, because there was nothing to retaliate against. No violation, no aggression. Just a galaxy learning that it could function without the hand that had ruled it for millennia. And at the center of that shift was a species that had once been ordered to obey. They hadn't refused. They had simply stepped aside. And in doing so, revealed how fragile the Council's control had always been.
The Council could survive embarrassment. It had survived rebellion before. It had survived wars, secessions, even extinction-level events. What it had never survived was irrelevance. Entire sectors were now bypassing Council arbitration. Independent trade accords were forming without Council oversight. Human mediators, never officials, never governors, were quietly resolving disputes faster than Council courts ever had. Not by force, by reliability. That terrified them. So the Council did what it had always done when authority slipped. It made a public demand. An emergency convocation was announced across all registered systems. Attendance was declared mandatory. The wording was deliberate. Human representatives are hereby ordered to appear before the Galactic Council to answer for systemic destabilization. The broadcast carried weight. Old weight. For centuries, such summons had meant fleets mobilized, economies frozen, species erased from records. The galaxy watched. Every channel carried the same question. Would humans finally show up? The chamber filled. Delegates arrived from 1,000 worlds. Carvel stood at the central dais, mandibles tight, eyes sharp. This was meant to be a moment, a reassertion, a reminder. The chamber's massive central platform remained empty. At first, no one spoke. Minutes passed. Then murmurs. Then whispers turned to tension. A junior aide approached Carvel. No human delegation has entered Council space. Carvel didn't react. They're late, someone said. They wouldn't dare ignore a summons, another insisted. The Council waited. An hour. Then 2. Finally, a signal request appeared on the central holo. Not a vessel, not a delegation. A single transmission. Carvel authorized it. The hologram resolved into a simple scene. No uniform, no flags. A human woman stood in a well-lit room. Not a command center, a civilian office. Behind her, a wall of windows showed Earth's orbit, ships moving calmly, efficiently. She looked directly at the projection. "Galactic Council," she said evenly. "I am not here to answer charges." Her voice was calm, unemotional. "I am here to notify you." A ripple passed through the chamber. Humanity will not be attending this convocation. Outrage erupted. Threats were shouted, mandates cited, decrees invoked. She waited. When silence returned, she continued. "You summoned representatives," she said. "We sent none." Carvel leaned forward. "You defy lawful authority." "No," she replied. "We decline participation. You are destabilizing interstellar order. We are opting out of systems that harm civilian life. This council governs this galaxy." The woman tilted her head slightly. "That belief," she said, "is the subject of this message." Behind her, the display shifted. Data streams appeared. Trade maps, transit flows, supply dependencies. Entire regions of space lit up, routes, hubs, corridors. Then gradually human link nodes dimmed. "What you call destabilization," she said, "is correction." A new overlay appeared. Parallel networks, non-council arbitration zones, independent logistics corridors, open access transit lanes. All of this, she continued, already exists. The chamber fell silent.
You didn't notice, she said, because we never advertised it. Carvel's voice cut through the stillness. This is sedition. No, she answered. This is consent withdrawn. Her gaze hardened, not with anger, but certainty. For generations, humanity complied because we believed the system could be better. A pause. Haven 12 proved it could not. The image shifted again. Not to destruction, to reconstruction. Human engineers working alongside non-human civilians. Hospitals rebuilt, power grids restored, children playing beneath protective domes. No council banners, only shared insignias, temporary, practical. You burned a colony to enforce obedience, she said. We rebuilt it to restore life. The council attempted to cut the feed. It didn't work. Human networks routed around council infrastructure effortlessly. The transmission continued. You demand presence, she said, but presence requires trust. She leaned closer to the camera. You have none. Then came the final blow. Effective immediately, she announced, human-operated navigation, logistics, and arbitration systems would no longer recognize council authority as binding. Not hostile, not illegal, just irrelevant. Species would choose. Routes would adapt. Trade would flow where it was safest. And if you choose to respond with force, she concluded, we will defend our people. A pause. But understand this clearly. We will not fight you for control of the galaxy. We will outgrow you. The transmission ended. The chamber was silent. No applause, no shouting. Just the sound of 1,000 delegates realizing something fundamental had shifted. The council still existed, but its power no longer did. Carvel stared at the darkened platform. They had demanded presence. Humanity had answered with absence. And in that absence, the galaxy had seen the truth. Authority only works when people believe in it. And belief, once lost, does not return by decree.
The council told itself it still had options, that the human message had been a bluff, that the networks could be severed, that pressure, properly applied, would restore order. They convened in closed session. No delegates, no observers, no recordings, only senior members and military command. This has gone too far, one of the admirals said. They have undermined lawful authority. They have encouraged defiance, another added. If we do nothing, others will follow. Carvel remained silent, mandibles pressed together. Force had always worked. Not immediately, but eventually. They voted. The decision was framed carefully. Not war, a demonstration. One system, one strike. A reminder. The target was chosen for symbolism, a human-operated transit hub on the edge of council space. No civilians, they claimed, no permanent settlements, just infrastructure. A message. The fleet was dispatched. 17 council warships, each older than most human civilizations, but still formidable. They arrived without warning, without dialogue, without justification broadcast. The first shots disabled the outer relay nodes. The second wave targeted power distribution, precision strikes, clean, measured. The council's channels lit up with prepared statements. Authority must be preserved. Stability requires compliance. This action is regrettable, but necessary. Then something unexpected happened. Nothing. No emergency signals, no frantic countermeasures, no panicked response. The human transit hub went dark, and stayed dark. Council commanders exchanged glances. This was too easy, one murmured. Carvel's eyes narrowed. They ordered a closer approach. That was the moment the trap closed. Space around the fleet shifted, not violently, subtly. Sensors flickered, not from interference, but from absence. Gravitational reference points vanished. Navigation systems reported conflicting data. The fleet wasn't under attack. It was disconnected. Then a signal arrived, not from the hub, from everywhere. Human-coded, but not aggressive. A calm voice filled the command channels. You are currently inside a non-hostile containment field. The admiral shouted orders. Weapons wouldn't lock. Engines wouldn't respond. The voice continued. This field does not damage hulls, disrupt life support, or interfere with internal systems. A pause. It simply prevents you from leaving. Carvel demanded visual confirmation. The external view resolved. The stars were still there, but distant, muted, as if behind glass.
"What is this?" one admiral whispered. The voice answered, "A redundancy. For situations exactly like this." A holographic map appeared on their displays. Human installations, not clustered, distributed, layered, hidden inside civilian routes, trade corridors, and maintenance networks. "This hub you disable," the voice said, "was scheduled for decommissioning next week." Silence. "We anticipated this response," the voice continued. "We hoped you wouldn't choose it." A subtle shift in tone. "But we prepared for it." Carvel's mandibles trembled. "You dare restrain Council warships?" "We did not restrain you," the voice replied. "You restrained yourselves by entering space you no longer control." The implication landed like a physical blow. The Council fleet had crossed into human-managed transit space, space that still appeared neutral on Council maps. Maps that were now outdated. "Release us," Carvel demanded. "That depends," the voice said. "On what?" "On whether this demonstration was sufficient." No threat, no ultimatum, just a statement. "You will be released," the voice continued, "after you acknowledge that this action violated agreed transit accords." The admirals protested. They cited authority, precedent, power. The voice waited. Finally, Carvel spoke. Low, measured. "What happens if we refuse?" The answer came immediately. "Nothing," the voice said. A pause. "You will remain here." No timeline, no escalation, just stasis. Carvel understood then. This wasn't about victory. It was about patience. The Council had built systems that required obedience. Humanity had built systems that assumed defiance. Hours passed. Then days. Council ships floated, intact, powerless. Not disabled, not destroyed. Ignored. News spread. Not through Council channels. Through traders, civilians, independent networks. The Great Council fleet had gone silent. Not destroyed. Contained. Without a single casualty. Finally, the Council relented. A formal acknowledgement was transmitted. Carefully worded, legally dense, but unmistakable. The moment it was received, the containment field dissolved. Engines restarted. Navigation returned. The fleet withdrew. No pursuit, no retaliation, just observation. As the last ship jumped away, the human voice returned. "This concludes the demonstration," it said. "For future reference." A pause. "Next time, we may not choose restraint." The channel closed. The Council had chosen force. Humanity had answered with preparation. And the galaxy learned something new. Humans didn't win wars by destroying enemies. They won by making conflict unnecessary and making escalation pointless.
The Council did not announce what had happened. They issued no emergency broadcast, no clarification, no denial. They simply resumed operations, as if 17 warships had not vanished for days and returned without explanation. But the galaxy noticed. Traders noticed first. Routes that normally required Council clearance suddenly accepted human authentication codes without delay. Transit fees adjusted. Inspection protocols softened. Automated systems began treating human-issued permissions as equivalent to Council authority. No one said why. Merchants whispered instead. "I heard the Council fleet got stuck. No weapons fire, no damage. They just couldn't leave." Independent captains began adjusting their plans. If humans could quietly contain a Council strike group without violence, without losses, then human space was no longer risky. It was stable, and stability was valuable. Diplomatic envoys followed. Minor species sent feelers, cultural attachés, trade negotiators. None of them arrived openly. They came as observers, as students, as temporary liaisons. They asked careful questions, not about weapons, not about fleets, about process. How do you manage disputes? What happens when someone refuses your terms? What laws govern your response? The human answers were unsettling. We assume refusal. We build around it. We don't escalate unless there's no other option. That philosophy spread faster than any fleet. Council-aligned worlds began reviewing their own agreements. Some quietly withdrew enforcement support. Others delayed Council requests. A few openly refused. The Council issued warnings. They sounded hollow. Carvel felt it. In meetings, in the way eyes avoided his, in the silence that followed Council directives. Authority only functioned when people believed in it, and belief had cracked.
One moment in particular haunted him. A junior aide, barely a century old, had asked during a briefing, "If humans can contain us without force, why do we assume they fear us?" No one answered, because the answer was obvious. They didn't. The most unsettling change came from the archives. Historians began revisiting old cases, interventions, sanctions, disappearances. Patterns emerged. The council had always relied on inevitability. Compliance was framed as survival, resistance as extinction. Humans had introduced a third option: persistence, not rebellion, not submission, endurance. And endurance made authority negotiable. A message arrived on Carvel's private channel, unencrypted, unthreatening. It read, "We are not seeking replacement. We are seeking balance. You may continue as you are, or adapt." No signature. He knew who it was from. That night, Carvel stared out over the Capitol spire, watching traffic lanes glow like veins of light. For the first time in his long career, he felt something unfamiliar: relief. Because the galaxy had been holding its breath for millennia, afraid of what would happen if the council ever failed. Now it knew. Failure didn't mean collapse. It meant change. And humanity had proven something profound: that power didn't need spectacle, that restraint could be stronger than fear, that authority earned was harder to break than authority enforced. The galaxy didn't crown humans. It didn't kneel. It simply adjusted, quietly, naturally, as if it had been waiting for someone to show another way. And somewhere, far from the spires and chambers of rule, a human child looked up at the stars, not as subjects, not as threats, but as neighbors.
Years passed. Not dramatic ones, not marked by wars or declarations, just years. The kind where trade stabilized, borders softened, and conflicts de-escalated before they became catastrophes. The Council still existed, so did humanity. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The Council no longer spoke at the galaxy, it spoke within it. Human presence did not expand rapidly. There were no grand annexations, no cultural mandates, no forced treaties. Human space remained compact, deliberate, carefully managed. That restraint unsettled some. It reassured many, because it meant humans weren't interested in control. They were interested in systems. They invested in transit infrastructure, in mediation frameworks, in shared response protocols for disasters. When a star went unstable, humans arrived with stabilizers, not warships. When a colony faced famine, human logistics units deployed before pleas became riots. When a border dispute flared, human observers arrived unarmed and stayed until tempers cooled. They did not command, they facilitated. And when asked why, the answer was always simple: because we remember what happens when no one helps. Children across the galaxy began learning human case studies, not as legends, but as curriculum. Not stories of conquest, stories of restraint. One lesson appeared again and again. The strongest species in a system is the one that can stop itself. Carvel retired quietly. No ceremony, no monument. He spent his remaining cycles advising reform councils and drafting procedural safeguards, most of them inspired by human redundancy models. In his final public address, he said only one thing worth recording: "We mistook obedience for stability. Humans taught us the difference." On Earth, life went on. Children attended school, engineers argued over designs, artists still complained about funding. The human military changed too. Ranks flattened, doctrine evolved. The goal was no longer dominance, it was containment of escalation. Young officers were taught one core principle before anything else: if you have to prove your strength, you've already failed. The alien woman returned once more. This time, she came alone. Her daughter walked beside her, older now, curious eyes scanning the human city with quiet wonder. They sat in a public plaza, no guards, no officials, just people. The daughter finally asked the question she'd been holding for years. Why didn't you fight them? The human she asked considered it carefully, then answered,
Because if we had, they would have learned nothing. The girl nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Because to her generation, it did. The galaxy would argue about humans for centuries. Some would call them dangerous, others would call them necessary. But no one would ever call them predictable. And that perhaps was the most important lesson. That humanity wasn't powerful because it dominated, or because it endured, or because it adapted. Humanity was powerful because it chose when not to use any of those things. You could pressure humans, you could threaten them, you could even try to erase them. But you could never corner them into losing their values. And once the galaxy understood that, it stopped trying.